Hello everyone, present day Aries here, and I'm just here to throw in a little disclaimer that the video you're about to watch was recorded back in 2023. So please take baby Aries' words with a grain of salt. Oh, and I've also changed the pitch of my voice for those sweet euphoria juices. Hope you enjoy. Hello everyone, Aries Rainy Days here, and welcome back to Rainy Day Creations. Today I've got one hell of a treat in store. With this being the first video of June, I wanted to take this as an opportunity to show off a handful of OCs that I've had in development for a pretty long time. And what better way to discuss each of their backstories, personalities, and hobbies than going super in-depth about their gender and sexual orientations. I'm also going to be sharing extra information about Strangetale in this video, so feel free to sit back, relax, grab a few snacks, and join me for another rainy day. Now, first things first, I'd like to give a little disclaimer out the gate about everyone's orientations and say that their experiences aren't the end-all be-all for these specific identities. Everyone's experience with gender and sexuality is unique, and I want to be able to leave some things up to your guys' interpretation, as a handful of these identities might not be as well known compared to others, so please take my words with a grain of salt from here. Now, the first character I'd like to discuss is Willow Ethrix. She is a 22-year-old trans-feminine Oryctolus hexeri, or rabbit monster. She is the oldest of 10 siblings and works as a software engineer in Gizmoborn Village's power plant, which is the Strangetale equivalent of Snowden Town. She is also an above-the-knee amputee and owns a custom prosthetic that she not only built, but also maintains regularly using any spare parts that are imported from the Forgotten Forest, or the Strangetale equivalent of the Ruins. Save for the fact that it's a small, foresty area that's shrouded in a hallucinogenic mist that is actually impossible to navigate without the proper gear. When she's off duty from the power plant, Widget can often be seen working part-time at the inn's bakery with her aunt, spending as much time away from her mother as she can since, well, Widget's not entirely accepted by her mother. Despite this, Widget still tries her best to be as sweet and considerate as possible to everyone she crosses paths with. It's also worth mentioning that Widget is asexual, meaning that she doesn't experience sexual attraction to other hexeri. Despite what you might be thinking, this doesn't mean she's incapable of holding a relationship or experiencing love, as she does experience romantic attraction to others. Her asexuality doesn't have any ties with her libido either. She just doesn't experience sexual attraction. She's just out here, existing in the world and trying to live her best life just like the rest of us. That makes sense? Good. Moving on. The second character I'm going to discuss is this sexy little gem, Nexus. Nexus is approximately 35 years old and is the Vitalis Empire's shining star, which is another way to say that he's the Strangetale equivalent to Metaton. He's completely made out of crystal and identifies as Libra masculine, which is an identity where someone who's mostly agender, or an individual that doesn't experience any gender, man, woman, or anything in between, experiences a small connection to masculinity. This is because, by default, Nexus's subspecies of monster are agender and lack any reproductive organs. That all being said, Nexus loves to be in the spotlight, effectively living as the glue that holds the Vitalis Empire together. He's extremely extroverted and has limited awareness of personal space as a concept, with a sharp tongue to boot, both in the literal and metaphorical sense, as he's not one to shy away from delivering a little sass to someone that needs a reality check. He also identifies as diameric, which is a label for non-binary and gender non-conforming individuals whose attraction cannot be described as same-sex or different sex. Typically, this sublabel is used to describe one's orientation, like diameric bisexual, but Nexus doesn't have any specific orientation past that. The third character I'm going to discuss is the one and only Skeleman of the Hour, Sans St. Seraph, or ST for short. Similar to Widget, ST is physically a 22-year-old skeleton hexerei who works as an engineer at the Gizmoborn power plant. The reason that I say physically is because he and his twin brother, Galahad, were both created in one of the Vitalis Empire's labs 12 years before the present day. To make a long story short, his backstory was heavily inspired by Zarla's comic Handplates, though I've taken my own creative liberty with the idea of Sans and Papyrus having previously been science experiments. I can get a lot more into his experiences in a later video, but to make a long story short, the first 2 years of his life were quite literally hell up until the day that his Gaster disappeared. When ST and Galahad realized that Gaster wasn't going to return after a couple of days of receiving no food, they escaped the lab and effectively went on the run until they were caught and adopted in by Grilby, who proceeded to raise them as his own until they reached adulthood. Now, as far as his personality goes, he's one of the unsansliest Sanses that ever sansed. He doesn't like puns, he's extremely high-strung and anxious, he hates being perceived as lazy, and is a massive workaholic as a result, oftentimes working until he quite literally falls apart. The few things he does have in common with your average Sans is his above-average intelligence ties more into book smarts rather than street smarts given his profession. He's also incredibly stubborn and has an ability to mask his emotions, even if that last bit is hit or miss depending on his mental state. He identifies as bisexual, though he has zero preference for the gender or race of his partners, having been with various humans and monsters in the past. He also identifies as ambiamorous, which means that he has no preference between starting a monogamous or polyamorous relationship. When he's not busy tinkering or inventing a useless machine that get him in trouble with the Royal Guard, he can be typically found writing music and playing the guitar in his room. On to the next character I'd like to discuss. This beautiful little ghost goyle is named Opalescence Glassheart, or Opal for short. She's 23 years old, and is not only one of ST's few friends, but is actually his ex-girlfriend. Yes, you heard that right. These two shared some chemistry at some point before deciding that they were better off being friends. Opal is a 23-year-old ghost gargoyle hybrid who lurks around the outskirts of Crystal Lake City, which is the Strangetale equivalent of the capital, and located within the Azure Vales, which is the Strangetale equivalent to Waterfall. It's the only character of the bunch that identifies as cis-het in this picture, and she was also ST's childhood friend, having provided him emotional support throughout his entire life. From his first breakup to his brother's passing, Opal always made sure to put ST's emotional well-being first, even to her own detriment at times. When she's not hanging around ST, she can usually be found in the Azure Vales collecting small crystals that she could use to make jewelry that she sells. There's not much that I could say about her upbringing at the moment, as her story is a very simple and straightforward one. She was born to two parents, a gargoyle and a ghost, who always put her best interest first, raising her to be a kind and gentle soul. However, don't think for a second that she's a pushover, as she can become confrontational if she feels that she's being slighted in some way. The fifth character I'd like to discuss is the adorable little mage, Skylar. Skylar is a 16-year-old girl born and raised in a hidden village on the surface located deep inside one of the forests by Abbott City. The village's population consists almost entirely of mages, who I'll be referring to from here as the Silver Mages, that all specialize in different kinds of magic at varying expertise. And Skylar's no exception to this rule, as her monotype allows her to shift gravity with the help of her familiar Chi-Chi, who is a little galaxy ferret. To get a better idea on how her magic works, it's similar to like how Cat's or Raven's powers work from the game Gravity Rush. She was effectively raised in isolation, with her only exposure to the outside world being old tales about the monsters that live in Mount Ebot. A lot of concepts such as gender and sexuality are completely foreign to her, though she is completely open to learning about these at her own pace. This is why I chose to depict her holding 3 different flags: the pansexuality flag, the lesbian flag, and one variation of the polyamory flag. This is because I wanted to be able to depict a character who's not entirely certain where they stand as far as their orientation goes. That all being said, she's incredibly wary of humans and monsters due to her upbringing with a stronger disdain towards the monster population, especially after the barrier leading into the Vitalis Empire had shattered. This doesn't mean that she'll be outright rude to everyone that she meets. However, she'll put up a cold front and will be rather blunt and straightforward about what she wants. When she's comfortable, however, she's extremely playful and silly, occasionally pranking unsuspecting mages with her magic, as it's the least dangerous way for her to practice her abilities. Now, the last character I'm going to discuss is a massive train wreck, to put it lightly. Full little abomination at the end of the line is known as JD, who is a fusion between an alternate version of Fresh and a robot named Starlight. Originally, I'd created them as a fusion between Fresh and my old persona Talia, though I've since retired their old design and exchanged for their more fluffy, goat-like appearance here. JD is also bi-gender, meaning that they experience 2 coinciding gender identities. In their case specifically, their gender identity has ties between man and woman, and tends to fluctuate between the two. However, I want to make it clear that this is not the case for all bi-gendered individuals. JD is also asexual, which, as I already discussed earlier with Widgets, they do not experience sexual attraction to other monsters. Now, unlike all of the other characters I've discussed so far, JD is not a native resident to Strangetale. They've been a resident in the AU since they first activated approximately 13 years before the present day, and throughout most of their time in the universe, they've been a pretty massive nuisance to all of the Hexeri. They're extremely mischievous and highly intelligent, at least when it comes to street smarts, as they had resorted to stealing food and scamming monsters out of their money to survive. Up until the day that they were arrested, they were a master at evading the Royal Guard, opting to hide in many spots that they had made for themselves to stash their stolen goods. I can get further into their backstory in a future video, though the only other thing I'd like to mention is that after they were inevitably caught, they were since paroled and sent to live with ST, initially as a roommate, before he eventually adopted them in as his younger sibling. At which point, JD's become somewhat overprotective of their older brother. To be clear, they aren't the type to start conflict if they found out that ST has been ambushed by some of the AU's more unsavory refugees, opting to try and avoid conflict whenever possible. That being said though, they'll always make damn well sure that they're the last one standing in a fight, and have been known to smash a bottle over someone's head post-provocation. Which is a very fun way of saying that you should probably watch your back if they've decided to buy a bottle of alcohol from Flambeau's Pub and Grill. You're talking smack in front of them. They, like their brother, don't drink alcohol. Let that sink in. Finally, I want to touch briefly on my creative process with this piece. In total, this wallpaper took me about 15 hours to make from start to finish, and it's the first piece that I've been able to depict such a vast array of characters. And as painful as it was to admit to, I'm super proud of the finished product. Similar to my last video, I utilized a similar shading technique involving the multiply layer, specifically for multicolored or patterned clothing and obviously the flags, so that their colors didn't get too washed out. All of the extra shading that I've done is on its own separate layer, giving the characters a little extra pop, so to speak. I'm also extremely giddy about how the background came out, as I got to experiment with one of my favorite filters in the process of designing the background. is the hue, saturation, and vibrance filter, I believe. Ultimately, all that I did was I used the select tool on the background, opened up the filter and selected the colorize option and made some fine-tuned adjustments so that none of the colors clashed as I worked. I also went over the background with a spot brush to give it that glittery aesthetic, and upon adding the floor, I added a clipping layer so that I could color it without losing the shape of the line that I had already made. Now, as much as I'd love to get more in depth about everyone's backstories and my processes in creating them, I'm afraid that I'm gonna have to end this video here. If you guys want to hear more about these characters, feel free to ask questions in the comments below and I'll happily answer them to the best of my ability. Also, let me know who you'd like to see more art of in future videos. Everyone that's stuck around this far into the video, I want to thank you guys for taking the time out of your day to listen to me ramble about each and every one of these characters. It's not often that I get to throw these characters out into the spotlight how I want to, and there's only so much emotion and anticipation you can communicate through text before it becomes overwhelming. I hope that your pillows are pleasantly chilled and that I get to see you all on another rainy day. Happy Pride!